Okay, so today's session is on influencing policy, and we're going to do a really deep dive into what this actually means, how we can do this in a way that is effective, that actually leads to real policy change, that then makes a difference on the ground, but in a way that's responsible and evidence-led. Whatever it is that we might consider to be evidence, and we're going to have to think very carefully through a whole load of moral issues, as well as the more practical considerations of how we do this. And so in today's session, I'm going to give you this really deep grounding, lead you through discussion to interrogate this for yourself so that we take a responsible approach to this. And then we're going to start looking at some of the strategic tools that will enable you to have more of an impact in the policy domain, despite all of the unique constraints when you're trying to make this kind of change. And we'll then look at some very practical tools, methods, approaches. We'll look at policy briefs, policy infographics, a whole load of things like that. But my experience is that that's where we tend to dive in. Let's make a policy brief. And actually, when we've not done that deeper thinking, potentially, we have more negative impacts than positive. Worst case scenario, best case scenario, it's just poorly targeted, not on the money, a waste of everyone's time. And so whether it's about being effective or being responsible, this framework we'll look at to begin with means that what you do ultimately with those tools will be far more effective, far safer, and be something that you can be genuinely proud of at the end of the day. So let's start my slides, and we'll do some introductions. So today's session is run via Fast Track Impact, delivered by the Institute for Methods Innovation that I work for. And this is funded today by the European Union as part of the 4PEAT project. Yeah, I meant to have this up on my screen. Maria from the team, we've got a few team members here, but if someone could put a link to our project for anyone who is curious about the research we're doing, which we hope will influence policy, do have a look. I'll put into the chat a few more bits of information about me. I think the key thing that I want to communicate from this, as I did in the previous session, if you were on that, is that I hope today to come both from a place of expertise. I have published many peer-reviewed articles on research policy networks, how it is that research influences policy or not, as the case may be. And so we'll be drawing on my own peer-reviewed research and books, but also on the broader evidence as I have reviewed and understand that, of course, always somewhat partial. But it is also coming from a place of experience as well. So yeah, there's some metrics around my research, but also some of the policy and market processes that I've been part of that I continue to advise on, and hopefully have impact through. So I'll interject with a few stories to illustrate my points. The idea being that this becomes realistic for actual real academics like you. Yeah, I've been there, I've done that. I've had to try and juggle my teaching and my admin and all these research goals alongside trying to make a difference. Yeah, not easy. But we'll try and keep things grounded. If you're interested to find out more about how you can bring this training or any of the other trainings, then have a look on the Fast Track Impact website. We've got experience around the world, and we've got people from many countries across Europe. We've got certainly one person from Australia here, and always tailor what I do to your context. But have a look and explore and get in touch if you want me to do anything for you. So I've already given you a sense of what we're going to be doing today, going from the deep and strategic stuff through to more practical stuff towards the end. It's a 3-hour training. Let's just check that I've got this right in my head. So we are finishing, what is that, 12:30 UK time. So yeah, 3 hours. We'll have a break in the middle. Not quite sure when. If we're feeling a bit tired, maybe have 2 short breaks. But that's the plan. So, in the chat, I would love it if you could all introduce yourselves. So, anything about you that seems relevant, maybe a link to your personal website or whatever else it might be. Any questions, things you want to get out of today, add them in as well. And if it's not already covered, I'll do my best to adapt to that. And also in the chat, I'm going to give you the discount codes to my 2 most recent books. So the one that we're working from today is the Researcher's Guide to Influencing Policy. That's what it's called. But then more recently, I've published the 3rd edition of the Research Impact Handbook. So this includes policy impact, but goes much broader than that. So I want to start by thinking about why we are doing what we are doing here, and to make sure that we're doing it for kind of the right reasons. And let's be honest, we have contractual obligations, especially in these EU projects. We're meant to be making a difference. There are career aspirations in the UK. Having a ref impact case study is not going to do my career any harm. In some cases, it could help me with promotion. But my hope is that in that mix is genuinely wanting to make a difference. And so critical to anything that we do in the domain of policy is that we need to check our motives. Is this about our ego and making it look like we're big and famous and making a difference? Or are we actually trying to help people? Is this about helping the government in power to look good? Or is it actually about helping them to help the disadvantaged in society, to help future generations, to help non-human species, those with no voice? Yeah, really, what is this about? And I think that getting clear on what impact is important, because especially in this EU project domain, there's a whole load of stuff which is all about dissemination. It's about metrics of number of people who've watched our YouTube videos. And yeah, me and Maria did a little bit of self-promotion there. Watch our YouTube video, but actually, I was saying the reason for watching that YouTube video is not to help us with our metrics, but because you might learn something that could help you to help peatlands. And actually, it doesn't matter how many YouTube views, followers on LinkedIn, whatever else it might be. Actually, all of that is just engagement, and it may just be noise. And if it hasn't led to some kind of benefit, then potentially it was completely pointless. So great, yeah, let's engage with social media, with videos, let's do policy webinars, but let's not care about the number of people who come to our webinar. Let's care more about whether someone is now doing something that creates a benefit. And we need to stay with this. We need to follow this up. This is going to be harder work, but if it's only one person who benefits, and now as a result, there's a new policy, an amended policy, a change in policy, then yeah, great. That's the kind of thing that we're looking for. But let's now apply this to policy. I've just attempted to do that, but I wonder in the chat, what are the kind of things that come to mind when you think about policy impact? I've given you a few clues here, but what I want to do is to broaden the envelope here, because I've talked about things which are quite obvious in the domain of the impressive. But actually, if we broaden this envelope out, we begin to realize that there's a whole load of things that count as policy impact, that are worthy of our pursuit because they are genuinely beneficial to society. and that many of us don't even think about. They're not even on our radar. And instantly now we have times 10 the different opportunities for impact here. So in the chat, what comes to mind when we think about policy impact? So apply my definition. Whatever you say, it needs to be beneficial. So if you say policy webinars, yeah, maybe the wrong people turned up, and maybe nobody turned up. It happens, sadly. Maybe the right people turned up, but they misunderstood you and they've done something that's going to cause untold harm. Yeah, the fact that you did a policy webinar, that's not a benefit. Yeah, I'm not going to claim that as policy impact. No, yeah, let's apply this criterion of benefit, and now tell me what are all of the kinds of, well, let's say policy benefits that we could achieve. Okay, so great. Richard, this is about improving lives, in this case, improving animal and human lives. So go back in, Richard, and tell me what would be a policy impact specifically that delivers those kinds of changes. And go specific, actually. Yeah, go in your domain. Yeah, tell me, yeah, that policy, for example, or whatever it might be. Give us a bit more specificity. But yeah, you're the key thing, Richard, is you're looking at the end point, and that's what we need to be doing. So great. Um, Ayinka, please tell me if I'm mispronouncing your name. Um, Causing local bodies to change standard operating procedures so that they're more inclusive. So the end point is more inclusive. Great. The problem is a lot of people would stop. They would say, I'm going to change the standard operating procedures of this local body. Is that an impact? Well, they change their practices. But actually, maybe that new practice saves them a bit of money, but actually now is excluding a whole lot of people that were very expensive to reach. Is this really a benefit? Yeah, maybe not. Actually, this now it saved them a bit of money, but it's caused so much friction that nobody is using the service anymore. And in fact, maybe it's somehow worsened this service. Yeah, we thought it was a good idea. Turns out, in practice, there's a whole lot of unintended negative consequences. So yeah, the key point is we've done this, and as a result of that change in procedure, this service has just become more inclusive. People are being helped that were not being helped before. So that's a great answer. Thank you. Freya, organizations making a change to how they do something. So working from home. And again, yeah, so we've made a change. Is that good or not? Okay, it's letting people work from home. There's a whole load of people who are upset about that. We've lost camaraderie. We've got no idea if anyone's actually doing any work. Maybe everyone's taking money for nothing. But no, we've got the result is we've reduced travel emissions. Fantastic. So instantly you're on this, guys. Well done. Yeah, great. So thanks, Maria. So scientific results are used to shape policy and regulations. Now, I'm going to problematize this one in that most of us are perfectly happy. This is national legislation. In most Western democracies, most people are happy to say that was an impact because there are so many checks and balances built into this, that if it gets through all of those and it passes, this is now in law, there's probably good enough evidence behind this, it's going to work. So yeah, I'm going to say that's an impact, but we still need to be careful because look at how many policies are passed that actually don't lead to good stuff. And I'm going to reveal some of my politics here, but I'm going to suggest that Britain voting for Brexit did not bring us anything good. But hey, it was a policy change. And if my research was responsible for that, then I'm not going to be that proud of this. So we do all need to pay some attention to, okay, we've got a policy, but is that policy being implemented? Is that implemented policy actually delivering beneficial change? I work closely enough with you, Maria, that I know that that is exactly the kind of policies that you are promoting. But the point is that we're thinking deeply about this. Okay, great. Now, Elena, this is brilliant. So we tend to think about policy being a change in the law. Instantly, what I want to do here is to start broadening this out too. This could be a new law. It could actually be an amendment to an existing law that isn't really working for everyone. Great, still counts as policy. It could be about preventing a new law from passing, such as Brexit, that was going to be bad. Great, actually, we remain with the status quo. We prevented something bad from happening. That's also legitimate in terms of new policies, changed policies, prevented policies. But we can now go into the domain of regulation. So no law needs to be changed, but this regulatory body is not testing for the right things. And so there are pollutants going into the environment that are causing untold damage. Our research has now shown they need to add a new test into what they're doing if they're actually going to protect our interests. Yeah, no law needs to change, but someone somewhere needs to change that regulation. And the kind of thing that you're talking about here, Elaine, oh, looks like Elaine has left us, is great. We now have a change in the way in which the national greenhouse gas inventory works. This is a policy change because now we are changing how we do things. And so I'm going to give you a back of the envelope definition. What is policy? A policy is how we do things around here. And typically, a policy has some means of implementing it. So it's not just a good idea. I've got an idea about how we should do things around here. It's someone who has the power to say, here's how we do things around here, and a mechanism for making sure we do things like this. So great, we've now changed how we do the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. That now means we've got to do something about those emissions on that kind of land use, that sort of land management. Great, that is now going to lead to change. I'm just looking, yeah, so Maria, thanks. So let's broaden it a step further. So we've gone from different kinds of policies being added, changed, removed, prevented, through to regulation. Let's maybe add in strategy in here. I've helped governments and bodies come up with new strategies. And as long as there is some kind of mechanism behind that strategy to make it actually happen, then strategies can actually be very influential and achieve change. This could be, Maria, yeah, changing how people think about a particular topic. Now, this is attitudinal change, or it's changes in awareness and understanding. Now, this is a weak impact. Because I always want to know, okay, now you understand this better. I want to know what you're going to do as a result of this. Now you're thinking differently about this. You've changed your attitudes. I want to know what's going to happen as a result. And so ultimately, the only way you can determine if this is impact is to ask the person in that policy domain, is this now actually beneficial for your practice? I guess the third thing I'd add into here would be capacity building. So we've got a new decision support system. Great, it actually helps me do things I couldn't do before. I can make better decisions as a result. If the person receiving this knowledge, this skill, this tool, this new way of thinking would characterize that as, yes, that is beneficial for me and my team, great, we can call this impact. But it's weak, it's early stage. I need to see what you now do with this. And how this moves from a benefit for you as a policy person into a benefit for society before this becomes in any way impressive. So yeah, as an example, I've done training for policy colleagues in how to do better engagement that is more inclusive, rather than just working with the usual suspects with written consultations. And yeah, the evidence is clear that people who are going to be most effective, you're never going to hear their voice. And so I've done training, great. Those people reported at the end of the training, we learned useful things and we are going to put this into practice. It's then my task to follow this up and find out, do they put it into practice? Okay, it turns out it's a bit difficult. Let me help you with that. Great, and we get more impacts arising from that. A lot of us have been in situations where, yeah, manic, we've given some evidence that could influence policy. Equally, I've heard my policy colleagues complaining about being given evidence that isn't of a use at all. So I've got a role in a conservation charity. We own and operate a peatland carbon market. And we've been hit over the head by AI, no, by blockchain researchers repeatedly. Because everyone's like, you need blockchain for your carbon market. And actually, we don't, because we have not allowed secondary markets, because we're about climate change, not about creating investment bubbles. So we're not interested in your blockchain research, but these researchers keep coming. And a little bit of intelligence would make you realize, okay, that's not relevant. I'll stop wasting your time. Yeah. So just because you've got research evidence doesn't mean that it's any benefit. In fact, the opposite, if you keep wasting our time with irrelevant evidence, actually. But give us some evidence that enables us to move our peatland carbon market from the uplands to the lowlands and solve the bigger problem with our peatland emissions in the country. Great. Now you're talking. Great. Now we can do something we couldn't do before. That's useful knowledge for us that we've benefited from even before we've managed to get the market working. Great. And then in terms of attitudinal change, I've done work with people around just the capitalist framework that many civil servants work within without realizing. And actually, there are green growth and post-growth options that are just not being put on the table because of the prejudices and biases of the civil servants. And actually, if the evidence points to the fact that there's an option you should be putting on the table, if I can change their mindset to say, you know what, even if we've got a right-wing government, it is still legitimate to put green growth and post-growth options on the table, then hey, even if none of them get through under this government, those civil servants are still there with these new ways of thinking for the next government. Okay, so thoughts, questions. We've just blown apart this whole idea of it's all about legislation, kind of policy change. Yeah, that might be what you get eventually. There's a whole load of other stuff that counts. So the key thing is you have the evidence, and there's been a whole load of the red, amber, green labeling on fact content has been proven to be largely ineffective. We wasted a whole lot of time and energy because nobody actually looked at the real world effect on human behavior. It made perfect sense. Put a big red warning light on this and nobody's going to buy it in reality. And so great, we've got a mechanism. We learn from other people's mistakes. We trial this, we test this, and great. But just because we've got an idea, yeah, that's not impact yet. We need to actually feed this through, make sure it's working, adapt it if it's not, and great, credible. But let's see. Good. So, no more questions by the looks of things. The next thing I want to ask, of course, is this question. Okay, you've got a benefit, but who is benefiting? And of course, there is a subjectivity inherent in any definition of impact, any sophisticated definition of impact. You saw this in my last session if you were with me on this. The point is, impact is an eye of the beholder. What might be an impact, a benefit to one group, could actually harm the interests of another group. And you always have to weigh this. And so we're going to look at some tools that will enable you to strategically think more clearly about this and be more inclusive, and make sure at least that the most disadvantaged in society are not further disadvantaged by what you are doing. And so when we do that kind of work, we begin to realize, oh, of course, a policy brief is not impact. Who knows if anyone read it? My policy webinar is not impact. Who knows if I just spoke in policy jargon and it went over their head? Giving evidence to a select committee hearing, inquiry, committee, not impact because maybe everyone disagreed with me. Getting recommendations into their reports, not impact until someone actually acts on that recommendation. But maybe someone learned something useful, gained a new skill, I changed their attitudes. Let's follow up, let's find out, let's build on those kinds of successes. And then, yeah, if it's a benefit, great, we've got some impact. But the life until someone somewhere in the beneficial, I have potentially just been wasting my time. So I want to get a lot more focused on how we can use our limited time to make more of a difference. I'm going to start with a perhaps provocative suggestion that there's no such thing, or at least there should be no such thing as evidence-based policy, at least purely evidence-based policy, because what we are doing is in this red, orange box, peach box, let's call it that, in the top left. We are generating evidence from research, but we need to think about how to do this responsibly. Your funder will tell you to write a policy brief based on your project. Instantly, I'm telling you that is not responsible. You should not be making policy recommendations based on single studies. That is not what civil servants are taught to do. They're told to do this based on bodies of evidence, if possible, based on evidence synthesis, on meta-analysis. In reality, yeah, it's a lot more qualitative than that. It's in narrative mode. But if we base policies on single studies, new studies will come along which are equally credible, but based on a different sampling regime, research design, time horizon, model design, assumptions. They've got different results. And now policy flip-flops to the latest research finding. That is not a responsible way to do policy. So we need to be responsible. And yes, we write our policy brief if that's what we're contracted to do. But we integrate in those bodies of evidence as our foundation. If we've got time and money, we do the evidence synthesis, the meta-analysis. And now we're going to feature our research findings from this project, and we're going to illustrate it with our case studies. But we do something deeper than just, yeah, here's our latest finding. More importantly, though, I think we have a responsibility to integrate into our evidence other people's evidence and perspectives from both other academics, including those who disagree with us. And we can explain why we differ, but rather than hiding that, we represent the breadth of opinion. Rather than misleading people to say, yeah, there is a settled opinion, if there is not a settled opinion from the academic literature. And we also bring in these other perspectives, the lived perspectives from real life that may actually add a nuance that says, yeah, technically this is what we should do. But here are all the people you're going to upset. Here are the people you're going to disenfranchise. Here are their voices. And now, as a policymaker, I can make a much more informed decision. Yeah, technically we could do this, but I need to tread carefully because, yeah, morally, this may not be the right thing to do. We live in a democracy, not a technocracy. And if you believe in evidence-based policy, you believe in technocracy, not in democracy. And so that means that you accept that our policy colleagues have the right to say we are not following the evidence because the public are not happy with that solution. And that's difficult. GM being a nice example of this. I work with lots of people who work with genetically modified foods who all tell me the evidence is clear, this is safe. And yet country after country tread carefully on this issue despite the evidence because the public are not happy. And that is right, I would argue. And then finally, briefly, of course, our policy colleagues have their own experience, their own training, their own professional judgment. They are more aware of both the political opportunities and the constraints, often budgetary, the political, the institutional context that means that, yeah, great idea, but that is just so naive. If you actually think anyone is going to do that, my goodness, that's embarrassing. Yeah, purely evidence-based, but embarrassingly naive. I now begin talking to these people and they say, yeah, we get the evidence. We know that's the right thing to do. but here's how you frame it. Here's how you fund it. And only once you've worked out how you frame and fund this in a way that makes this not just technically feasible, but politically feasible, is there any point in pitching this to a decision maker. So all of a sudden, we've broadened our conception of what counts. And I've just made this very complicated. Yes, of course, we're researchers. We have to base what we do on the evidence. But we can't just rely on our evidence, and we can't just rely on research evidence alone. And so finally, and I'm going to break for some discussion in a moment, I think that what this then tells us is that our role now is far more than a simple conduit. Here is the evidence. We have to understand layers and layers of complexity. There are uncertainties that we are aware of that we have to represent. We often don't know the answer. In the charity role that I have, we've just been asked to do a policy briefing on the impact of wind turbines on peat. And we've looked, there is no evidence. And yet, we have to brief our policy colleagues. And so we are now simply invoking the precautionary principle. We do not know, but based on the evidence we have, here is potentially how badly wrong this could go, which is why you should not extend these particular policies until we've got that evidence. So whether it's the unknown and uncertainty and how we responsibly deal with that, or the complexity of just different studies that say different things for different reasons. And actually, when you build this all together, there is a complex, coherent story. But how do I represent that in a way that can translate into a decision? And how do I avoid simplifying that with a nice map or graph or infographic that actually, yeah, communicates but misleads? We have to understand now that we are part of a complex web of relationships, and we have to manage those relationships very carefully. We have to think about how that is perceived. I put into the chat at the beginning all the things that I'm doing. For some people, that's credibility. I know what I'm talking about because I'm involved in policy. I'm involved in business. For others, that is a very long list of conflicts of interest. I should be nowhere near policy if I've got those business interests. And so for me, this is about being very transparent about that. And you can make your own mind up about if that's a problem or a benefit. And linked to those relationships, I need to be aware of my positionality. And whether you are in professional services with a PhD very often, whether you are a PhD student, you haven't even got your PhD yet, you are in a privileged position of power. You're respected. People look up to you. They listen to you. You have privileged access to decision makers that your average member of the public does not have. And we need to be aware of that and start to ask ourselves, how can we use that power to give other people access to those decision makers? So if you're a professor like me, how can you give your power away and enable your junior colleagues to access those same relationships, to get some of that experience? Of course, I'm white and I'm male. There's qualitative evidence in the UK that the majority of the most influential advisors are all old white men with professors in front of their name. That's a problem. And people like me can, in theory, help change that. But this is also, I'm going to suggest, not just about being more inclusive in terms of our colleagues. It's about sometimes us getting out of the way and saying that there are people whose voices are never heard. These are the underprivileged, the marginalized, the oppressed, the vulnerable. And at minimum, we need to ask how we can represent their perspectives, their views, alongside our evidence. If not, ideally opening that door for them so that they can have their own voice. So, thoughts Questions. Thanks, Richard. Straight off the bat, you mentioned a complex set of relationships and interests as being important to recognize. The problem is, in a particular area, it may be very difficult to understand these relationships or know what interests there really are. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So, um, the method that we're going to use, I introduced this to you in the previous session. We're going to look at this in more depth and think about this in relation to policy. It's called 3I analysis, and it's about systematically thinking about, okay, who are those people out there? Let's think about the policy community. So that's going to be politicians, so members of parliament type people, and civil servants. Great. So who are those people? Who are these people in then the policy networks that interact with those policy communities? There could be unions, lobbyists, charities, um, and they come into and out of influence as policy agendas intersect with their very specific agendas. Yeah, who are these people? What are all of their interests? Let's map this. Let's understand this. Now let's go and start talking to some of these people, get to know some of these people, start to get embedded within their networks. Great. Now I can see what was seemingly clever, but now kind of naive. Seemingly wise, but now, yeah, doomed to failure. And it's these people who will tell me that. But it's about understanding that and going in empathic. So it's not, here's me, here's my expertise, listen to me. It's, yeah, what are your challenges? How can I help? Let's build relationship. And now I get a sense of the complexity of what's actually going on. I've been doing some work recently, still going on, where we've been trying to influence a UK policy. Not many of these, because they're all devolved, but this particular one is UK policy, which instantly means we've got four governments to engage with. We presented the evidence. It seemed clear, yeah, you should follow this evidence. And yet we got a resounding no from all four governments. I'm in the process of writing a policy brief that goes through all of their objections, presents the evidence for why their objection isn't actually a problem. But actually what we realized instantly was, well, this doesn't make sense, actually. It seems like a no-brainer. This is going to have social goods, environmental goods. Why is everyone saying no? I can present all the evidence that explains why you made the wrong decision. But I'm instantly suspicious. And so we've been doing our research behind the scenes, talking to person after person, trying to understand actually what's going on here. And the conclusion we've reached actually is remarkably simple. What we're proposing to do it requires a new set of rules. And those rules are going to be very complex to administer. As a result, they're going to be expensive to administer. And all four teams are saying, we've got plenty of low-hanging fruit, we'll take that. This is too complicated. Simple as that. We haven't got time, we can't be bothered. And so what we've realized as an influencing strategy is, great, we're going to be watertight in terms of here's the evidence and why this works. Next step is we get very clear on the evidence for this is the scale of the benefit. And then final step is that we get government ministers on board. The government ministers can see that's a big benefit. We want that politically. And now we tell our our civil servants, do the work to get us that benefit. And that's how we get it. And we've looked across all four ministers, and we've worked out it's the Scottish minister who stands most to gain. And so we're not there yet, but we're going to, not me, because I don't have access to ministers, but through our networks, a part of this influencing strategy is we go to the Scottish government minister and we get him or her, whoever they are at that time, to then start lobbying their counterparts in the other four countries. They then tell the civil servant teams what to do because it lines up with the evidence. Great, job done. Richard, thoughts, reflections on this? What people say are their objections, actually, that's exactly my point. You're saying this can't be done. Actually, it can be done. You're saying that the evidence does support it. No, Yeah, you're actually saying we can't be bothered. Yeah, okay, that's also legitimate. But now we know what the real problem is. Now we can start trying to solve the real problem. How do we make a civil servant bothered? You get their boss to tell them to do it, basically. Um, a Yunker, some of these networks can be very obscure. You don't know what they are, and insular. So how do you get through? Um, Cold calling is not going to get you anywhere. Um, so it's a two-step process. The first step is your 3I analysis. Then you make your influencing strategy. So my 3I analysis, we'll come on to it in a moment. It means I work out who now are all the different groups who are interested in this, and which of these groups has most influence. And sometimes you discover there are some very powerful interests outside policy who are very much contactable and who may be able to have that word in the ear of the minister. Great. Not quite sure, but it looks like this, and this organization are very influential. Now I'm going to have a look and see, morally speaking, who of these can I do business with? Well, actually, yeah, the Farmers Union and this lobbyist group, yeah, you know what? I can't do business with them because they're trying to fight against nature. But this charity also has a lot of influence. Great. That's someone I can do business with. Let's go and talk to them. Brilliant. Typically, these kind of organizations already have influencing strategies. They know exactly what their routes to power are. Now you can help them, support them, give them the evidence that you need. They can see what you can't. But it's about going to them. Now, I don't have any connections into that charity. Okay, now what I'm doing is I'm now going through my networks. Do we know anyone who works with RSPB on this? With Wetlands International. Oh, excellent. Maria, you've got a relationship with Wetlands International. Could you introduce me to your colleague? Here's why. And now we're working through networks of trust. Great. Now, through Maria, I can talk to Wetlands International. Just yesterday, I was speaking to some colleagues. They want to influence a particular policy. And I said to them, you need to work out who are the movers and shakers, who are changing this policy. And they said, well, it's this guy and it's this guy. And I was like, I know one of those guys really well. Would you like me to introduce you to him? Great, job done. I'm going to be in that meeting. I'll introduce, I'll hand over. Great, maybe we get somewhere. But it's through networks of trust. And you do it systematically. Freya, thanks. It does feel like many things come down to cost. I've done some research with a national park, and there are a range of things they could do to make improvements, but they're sort of capacity so financially constrained, they feel they can't do anything, can't make investment for longer term gains. Yeah. So I think we're all going to come across this problem again and again. I'm going to say, broadly speaking, there are two solutions to this. Solution number one, in a democracy, I would argue, we need to always start with, well, perhaps this is something that the public should pay for. So for many of us working on climate issues, we just accept there's not enough money. But actually, if the public believed this was important enough and elected governments who prioritize the climate crisis, we would be trebling, times tensing our investment in climate. And maybe what we need to be doing is just making the political arguments, this is important, invest public money in this. And that's what solves the problem. So you always start there in a democracy, I would argue. But the reality is, yeah, we've got multiple priorities. We need to pay for education as well, or whatever it is. The public don't support this sufficiently. We have a limit on the funding available. Next step is to ask yourself, how can you work out how to fund this yourself? So that's why I have no interest in carbon markets. The reason that I'm involved in carbon markets is that I want to fix peat bogs, and I worked out we could not persuade government to spend more on it, but we could get private investment, and we could do that through carbon markets. I'm doing that now through internal decarbonisation strategies. That's where the money is. That's where the change will be. Great. I ask myself, what are the gaps? What are the barriers? Now, how do we solve this? And I go where the money is, within reason, of course, in terms of my ethics and my morals. And yeah, I now have lots of moral problems given the negative unintended consequences of the carbon markets that we unleashed on the world. But there's a new problem and a new research topic. But yeah. Uh, yeah, a huge problem that we have is policy to change, turnover, churn. So great, I built this relationship, and now they've moved on. And so for me, it's about having an ongoing, close enough relationship that when that person moves on, you know who their successor is going to be. You ask to be introduced to their successor. And so I regularly, as soon as I discover a new person in your team, I say, great, would you like a half-hour call with me coming into this new brief? I can tell you all the key bits of evidence that I think you need. Let's just start with that little briefing. Great, I've built that relationship with a new member of staff. Um, Another critical thing, I've got a slide on this, but I'll say this now in relation to this, and I think I'll make this my last comment for now. In fact, no, Paul has to go and take a call quickly. I will leave it for my slide. But there's a really big problem that we all have, which is great. The evidence says this, but this government will not do anything. And that's not fair. That's not right. That's not evidence-based. What do we do? And there are lots of things that you can still do. So fear not. Let's get practical on this. I'm in two minds about whether to get you to do this as a breakout room exercise or do this in plenary, just because I know a few of you came on the previous session. So we'll go with the flow on this. So let me see. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start three things. In my book, you'll see all three of these. We're going to look at the last two, but just to briefly say, in the book, there's a whole chapter getting you to really interrogate on whether you're actually ready to do any kind of policy engagement yet. And the key thing is, are you confident in the evidence? And actually, if the answer is no, you need to do more research. And very often the answer is actually very simply, not sure, I need to do some evidence synthesis. So the more systematic, the better, although, yeah, time, cost, accept that. But do your evidence synthesis, even if it's just in narrative mode, and ask yourself, is there a strong enough evidence base? If not, then ask for funding, see what you can do with existing funding, see what you can do with no funding based on secondary data, but try and fix those evidential problems before engaging. Otherwise, you could actually get a whole lot of negative unintended consequence. Yeah, so yeah, engaging on shaky evidence is never a good idea. Your funders just want impact. Ultimately, it's your responsibility. Even if your funder is saying it's you who has to say, no, we're not ready. So yeah, Angelia, so this is quite a pertinent question to this. So yeah, you came to me, policy person, with a question. I went to my own research and thought, oh, I've got a simple answer. I didn't give you that simple answer. I went to the wider body of research. I realized, oh, it's not that simple. So I did some evidence synthesis. And I realized it's still not that simple. We don't know the answer to this question. That's what I came back to you with. And then I told you, I'm going to do some extra research on this. Would you like to help me with this? And the answer is absolutely yes. Get them to help shape this. Because how I might frame this question as a researcher, great, this is an answerable research question. How you as a policy maker might frame that question, yeah, I can't answer that. That's not an answerable research question, but that would be useful if I could. Okay, that means I would have to answer these two questions as well. Okay, actually, that's quite helpful. Now my one research question turns into three research questions. I've got a more interesting and more credible research proposal. I've got a letter of support as well. So absolutely yes. But what I'm going to get you to do now is to have a think about your approach. So I'm going to get you to do some individual thinking, and then I'm going to take you into uh, a breakout room, and then we're going to come back and have a think through this before we then go to a comfort break. So we'll then look at the role stuff with some practical kind of skills-based stuff in the final segment. So first of all, I need you to ask yourself individually, I'm going to ask you to plot yourself in two-dimensional space on a 2x2 here. So your first task is to work out, how do you view knowledge and how do you construct knowledge as a researcher? Are you on the side of all knowledge is objective? We can break this whole down into its constituent parts through its fermentation. We can objectively understand with confidence intervals what reality is here. And that's my view of knowledge, how I construct knowledge. Is that you? A lot of the natural physical scientists, that's our training. If you're a social scientist, if you're from the arts and humanities, you may have been trained in a very different way to question anything objective and to suggest that actually, yeah, right, you've got some numbers. But there are always multiple ways I can interpret that, I can spin that. What does it mean? That's my question. I want to know why this thing happens. I'm asking those kinds of questions. And I will never believe that there is a single answer. I will always question and look for as many different options as I can before taking any course of action. Or maybe you're kind of a bit in between. Actually, yeah, I work with computer models and numbers, but I like to use those outputs in a more heuristic way to guide decisions rather than to tell you this is the answer. Yeah, that's probably where I am actually. But yeah, a little bit more to one side, a little bit more to the other. Where are you? The second one is it seems very simple. Well, of course, in theory, you need to be towards the top. If we're going to make a difference, we need to build close, trusting, working relationships. Isn't this what you've been saying, Mark? If we want our work to make a difference, it needs to be responsive to policy needs. If the policy's moved on and we didn't change our research, then it's completely pointless. It's totally useless. Yeah, pretty obvious. But actually, let's just question this for a moment. First of all, do you have time to do that? Do you have flexibility within your grant agreement to do that? Is that even possible? And actually, morally, how comfortable do you really feel about this? There's something known as the Haldane principle that suggests that research and policy should be independent of one another. At the point at which policy tells research what to do, we've got a moral problem here. And in fact, the more I think about this, the more I realize, no, I should be keeping my distance, because actually it is that distance, that independence, that objectivity that gives me my power. Where do you sit? A few descriptors, these may or may not resonate for you. But I'm going to suggest a very easy place that most of us can occupy if we've never engaged in policy is the role of a critical friend. I can ask those provocative questions. I can write an opinion piece for a blog or a newspaper. I can write a perspective piece for a peer-reviewed journal. I can send that to people. I don't have to answer any questions. I don't have to get any more involved. Yeah, see what happens. It's a good start. But we can then get a little bit closer without getting too close and play more of a knowledge broker type role. On the left-hand side, this is about me basing this on my own expertise. Here's what I know, and these bodies of work that I have access to, that I understand, and now based on this, I'm going to give you as many different policy options as I can with the evidence that will then help you make the best decision you can make. So I don't just go with my favorite option, the stuff that I know most about. I look broadly, I give you that shortcut to the literature, and I try and be as unbiased as possible, as broad, as helpful as I can, based on my expertise. The facilitating broker does exactly the same thing, but with one addition. They also look at the experience, perspectives beyond academia. And that's done by talking to those people who are experiencing those policy problems. And as a result, I'm now able to provide a much broader range of policy options because I'm not just accepting the policy problem as it's been framed by my policy colleagues. Okay, great, that's how you're framing it, given your colour of government. This is how powerful people would frame this, but actually this is not how the marginalized, how the vulnerable are framing this. This looks very different to them. And based on this, actually there are other options that you could consider. Is that more you? And then if you do want to get close, then yeah, let's collaborate. And I can collaborate based on my expertise. And now this is not just that I've got someone on an advisory panel. We're actually doing this research together, very much in partnership. And it could be monodisciplinary, it could be multidisciplinary, but our research colleagues are working with us in our team. We're collaborating. And that's a very powerful way of getting impact. And you also often see that through government contracts. Although be very careful about this, the contracts that you sign. More on that if you want later. Finally, then, we've got the idea of a facilitating collaborator. So same idea, we're collaborating in a team, but now this is not just our policy colleagues and our research colleagues in this cozy collaboration of two elites. Yeah, let's just think about that for a moment. We bring in these other groups as part of this. So this is now a transdisciplinary collaboration. Not for the faint-hearted. Not all these people are going to play by the same rules. They're not all going to like each other, let alone agree with each other. And you're right in the middle because you facilitated this thing. This is going to be complex. This is going to be emotionally demanding. This is going to take time. But yeah, hugely rewarding when it goes well. There is then the role of advocate and campaigner. The two go together. I would always start with advocacy. And to be honest, you can do this I switch. So my two preferred places are facilitating collaborator and advocate. And I switch between the two. And you can still be very close to your policy colleagues and use that closeness, that trust, to then advocate an evidence-based position. Typically, I will only do that where there is one very clear answer. This is all the evidence points. You have these two options in front of you, and the evidence says you need to go this way. So great. I'm now going to advocate for that, as I was suggesting earlier with that UK policy. Here is an idea. There are no regrets. This is going to be great for the environment. It's not even going to cost you that much because businesses are going to pay for this. So great. I have no regrets about going single issue. Evidence says, here's what you need to do. Is this lobbying? Well, I'm going to suggest the difference between lobbying versus advocating is this evidence-based and in the public interest? And so I'm going to call it advocacy, but I'll let you decide whether or not you think what I'm doing is appropriate. Only when that fails, so the insider approach fails, do I go to a campaigning approach and start saying, right, we now go to media, we now name and shame, we now try and mobilize the public to support this, to put pressure on government to do the right thing. But again, a lot of time, a lot of stress, this can go wrong. And when I do this, I like to stay behind the scenes, giving evidence to other people who are more confident than me. So, where do you sit? And it's quite important to get a sense of, yeah, here's where I'm headed, where I want to be. Here's where I tend to operate, because that clarity then will help us to think about the kinds of policy strategies and tools we will want to use, which will be most appropriate to the kind of roles that we want to play. And even something like a policy brief, you can create and use a policy brief in radically different ways. And you're going to start reading much more into this and adapting this to you rather than me telling you how I do things. You're going to be able to adapt this much more effectively if you've got a clear idea. So that's why this is so important, and I want everyone to write something, please. As I said, if you're not quite sure, just put a few question marks next to it. Um, you can give me a bit of narrative as to, yeah, I switch between these two for these reasons, entirely up to you. So there are kind of two sides to this, informing versus influencing, and we didn't cover this. Sorry, I'm just realizing now. But the safer starting place is to say, yeah, I'm just going to inform. I'm not going to necessarily do anything too targeted. So that's to say nice and safe, but it's always worth seeing, are there some consultation email lists out there that you could sign up to? Yeah, if we really want to influence, we're going to have to reach out in a very targeted way, and that's what we're going to look at in the next session. Collaborators amongst us, this is all about co-producing that impact plan when we get to that point. The critical friends and also the campaigners, I'm going to suggest a key step is to identify organizations you can work with who may be able to hold policy to account far more powerfully than you could alone, and maybe more safely as well. And the brokers amongst us, this is about identifying those different groups that might have different perspectives, whether that's research groups or people outside academia. Yeah, and beginning to understand the breadth of different ideas that you might be able to start presenting. So what we're going to do after the break is we're going to have a look at a couple of tools. I think we'll go through the 3I tool fairly briefly. I'll illustrate it with a story and dive into some deeper discussion around some of the complexities of both identifying and then managing and switching between different organizations' relationships as part of an influencing strategy. So we'll have a think about this 3I method for systematically being both strategic and inclusive. We'll look briefly at the idea of an influencing strategy or an impact strategy. And then we'll zoom into some of the tools. We'll have a look at some examples of policy products. I'll get you to pull them apart, maybe do that in another breakout room, and get you to the end of this with, yeah, I've got some practical skills, some tools I can deploy right now that are going to make a step change in both the effectiveness and the responsibility with which I engage in policy. So that's what's coming next.
It's not a lot. It was more, I just thought it was interesting with the uh, diagram that really, depending on what you were talking about, you could be anywhere. Because if a new policy is introduced and you're usually a collaborator, you have to criticize that policy first in
Mhm,
order to figure out how to collaborate on it.
mhm,
And sometimes you're like, the thing you're talking about is a single issue. So you are going to be more expert or you are going to be more of an advocacy role until
mhm,
you can reach that facilitating step. So sometimes you have to like go through a process in order
mhm.
to facilitate in the way that you want. I just thought that was interesting. That was really all I had to say.
Tell me more. What kind of stuff are you working on? So I'm a member of Plant Life in the UK, and I'm
Thank you.
collaborating with Plant Life at the moment on a feasibility study for a species-rich grassland code that could drive
Yes.
the creation of grasslands through soil carbon and biodiversity markets.
Yes. So I know who my colleagues who you work with on that. So that's
Yeah,
great.
great. Yeah, Claire and James.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah,
Claire
yeah.
and
So
James.
are you in
Yes.
their team?
I'm on the policy team, so they are more nature markets. But I
Great.
do work with them on temperate rainforest nature market
And I think I
issues.
told Claire about this training, which is how you probably found out. So you are.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I'll start introducing this and I'll revisit the chat just in terms of whether we do the breakout room exercise. So In the chat, I'm going to put a few different things. We've got this is the 3I analysis paper that we wrote. This is from the Wet Horizons project. We're using the same method currently, in fact, in the 4-Pete project. Have a look at this other paper if you're interested, which explains why I no longer use the word stakeholder. So technically it's a form of stakeholder analysis, but I'm calling it a 3I analysis. And I focus on engagement. You don't need the stakeholder in front. Every now and then there's slides that other people have put in that I haven't checked. So I'm hoping I'm not going to suddenly have a stakeholder word, but so far so good. This is not my slide, just so I suddenly realise, but we're all good. The reason that it's so important to be systematic about this is that we often are not aware of our biases. And the problem with this is that there are marginalized groups who everyone forgets, who we might forget as well. And if you don't take a systematic approach, it's often the usual suspects, the high interest, high influence groups that get included. And so the 3I approach is designed to ask an additional question that says, okay, there could be people who are not really that interested in what we're doing. They don't have time to be interested in it. They don't have any influence by definition because they are the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed. But they could be more impacted than anyone else. And other methods, or just doing this back of the envelope, forget or exclude these people. And you need to actually bring people like this in on purpose. Yes, you also need to bring in the high interest, high influence, high impact organizations as well. They could have staff time, resources, they could be massively helpful. But let's not do this at the expense of the most impacted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you a template. And I'll put this into the chat for you as a Word file. Let me know if you can't access that for any reason. Usually this works fine. There we are. And let's have a look. Very few people been to this before. Good. Okay, so we're going to do a breakout room exercise in this. So it's an individual task followed by a breakout room. And then I'm going to share a story and we'll go into much more depth of discussion on this. But this is a critical tool that will enable you to take the strategic approach, which means that you're now engaging with what little time you've got with the right organizations and the right people in those organizations. So it will save you time and make you way more effective. The theory behind this, the thing that makes this work, is that the evidence is clear. The more empathic your approach, the more influential you are. If it's me, you turn people off. If it's all about them and finding those points of common ground, and yeah, here's how I can help you achieve your objectives, solve your problems, that's what opens doors. That's what gets you the yeses. That's what ultimately works. So this is what enables you to understand the nature of each organization's interest, why they are influential or not, as the case may be, who might be influential within that organization, why are they so influential, what's the nature of that impact, is it positive, is it negative? Might they have more influence in one context or after a particular event? Have they got the power to facilitate the impact you want to see? Or in fact, are they an organization that could block you? Perhaps they even have the power to block you doing the research, for all we know. You need to know about them just as much. And so we collect information on these 3 points. Anything else that people think are relevant? We've got the stakeholder word there. Yeah, I knew it. Someone else made this for me. And then this last column implies that, yeah, you can do this yourself. You're going to do this now as an individual task before moving into discussion. But far more powerful if you do this as a team. Bring team members in who understand something more about the outside world. Potentially bring a few people from those external organizations in to the conversation. Could be done sticking this up onto a wall in a workshop. It can be done on a Google Sheet online. Yeah, but the more people you add into this, the more rich this information is going to be, the more useful it's going to be. And at the end of this, I could have 100 different organizations. Yeah, if I've got about 10 people in an hour, yeah, you could have 100 organizations here. But now I'm going to rank them. I'm going to ask myself, right, actually, based on what I've learned, who are the organizations with the highest interest, influence, impact? Great. Clearly, I need to talk to them. And they may be on your radar, they may not be. It's often surprising. And even if they're already on your radar, you may now discover, yeah, there are new ways I need to engage based on those interests, as well as the ones I knew about. I need to talk to this team. I need to foreground these benefits for them. Great. You're way more effective than you were before. But you also highlight and target some of those groups who are perhaps less interested, less influential, but could be impacted. You make this inclusive. Now, there's maybe 3, 4, 5 organizations I'm going to reach out to. That's not a lot of time. 4, 5 emails, each tailored to those organizations based on their interests. Not a broadcast email. It takes a little bit more time, but those kinds of emails get you a yes, let's talk. Now you've got 3, 4, maybe 5 conversations with real people, getting into their shoes, understanding really why they're interested, really what could help them. And now that's what enables you to make an influencing strategy, an impact strategy that actually works. And that's the next step. But it just illustrates just how important this is. The information you get here is gold dust, and it saves you a huge amount of time. So I'm going to suggest that you just do this for one organization. If you have time, do it for 2, but aim for 1 for now. And this is just going to give you 5 minutes of individual thinking time. You can fill in the template if you want, or you can just do it in your head, up to you. But really think qualitatively, write down as much detail as you can. What do you know about this organization? Their level of interest, their influence, how might they be impacted? So over to you now.
Yeah, I did it. I cheated a little bit. I did it for an organisation that I'm already sort of engaged with.
That's useful to know. Yeah, because you've got
Yeah,
some intelligence already.
yeah, it was quite interesting to think about specifically which aspects of my research they're interested in. So they're the National Retrofit Hub. My research is on retrofit. Should be a good, a good link there. But actually, I was thinking, well, no, specifically they're interested in resources that help increase the uptake of retrofit, or they're interested in the identification of barriers. They're not so interested in some of the technical stuff that I'm looking at. So that was quite useful to kind of pinpoint. Yeah, actually, it's those bits to target rather than those bits. So that was useful, and to also think about what they could, what influence they could do. So they've got connections with through to policymakers, and they've also got a large network. So if I produce something, they'll generally put it in their newsletter, which goes out to their 2,000 contacts, which includes lots of not national policymakers, but lots of local councils,
Yeah.
officers and things. So that's quite interesting to think about the reach there and how that works. Yeah, and beneficial because I also have contacts with the director, so I can just email them and go, "Hey, this is interesting, isn't it? Would you like to be interested in this?" But yeah, it was quite
Fantastic.
interesting to narrow it down and sort of think about specifically how it worked.
Yeah, but it's the step of empathy to realize, yeah, we've got the same interest, but actually there's nuance here. You're specifically interested in this. So for many years, the pushback that we had in this charity was all these people saying, you could do your thing so much better. And we were like, yeah, but we've got a major problem, which is that nobody's taking up even our basic version of this. So yeah, great. We'll put this on steroids eventually, but at the moment, we just need to work out what are the barriers, why is nobody taking this up, and let's get this thing working. And so yeah, quite often as researchers, we're on that cutting edge and we're a few steps ahead of where we're actually at in the real world, which is, yeah, we just need to get through a few roadblocks here. And so I wonder how many others of you've maybe worked with this organization for a while, you know something about them, but you're realizing, yeah, actually, here's my road in. And now can you link a benefit to that from them? And so, yeah, if you want to get their attention, this thing you're interested in and this benefit based on working with me, yeah, I can't promise anything, but let's have a talk. Yeah, really good. And then the influence. So yeah, I don't know what your research is, but if you were potentially more focusing on a particular technology, yeah, maybe they're not going to specifically sell, market, promote that, but they've got the networks that can. And maybe actually the most useful thing about engaging with them is simply that they can open a door to another organization that is actually where you want to be. And now I didn't really prioritize them. For all those reasons. But now I'm looking at that top priority organization and I'm realizing, oh, yeah, but those are the people who connect me. Brilliant. So, yeah, great.
Hi, yeah. So our project is on polluticulture, and we have polluticulture sites in Ireland and the UK and the Netherlands. Well,
So, just pause for a moment. For those of you who are not aware, polluticulture is wetland agriculture.
I'm going to have to learn to always say that, haven't I? And not just make the assumption that people understand. Yeah, so polluticulture. So we're trialing sites that will grow effectively on wetlands. And there's an organization called Teagasc Signpost. Well, the organization is Teagasc, and they run an initiative called Signpost, which is for farmers who want to um, build more climate resilience into their farming practices. So they have a number of demonstrator farmers all across the country, and they're working in arable farming and beef farming and dairy farming. What they don't have is a polluticulture farmer. And I would ultimately like for them to have a polluticulture farmer in their demonstrator farming network. That was my goal. So
Mm,
I wonder what's the best way to get there.
yeah, fantastic.
Mm.
So instantly you identify the organization.
Yeah.
And so what is it? Do you call it a signpost? What's the
Signpost. And the organization is Teagasc, so it's spelled Teagasc.
Okay, yes, I'm familiar. Great. I did not know that was how it's pronounced. Good. So, uh, so great. We know that Chagast is trying to help farmers. That's their job. And so, what farmers want is what they will want. But of course, they have a specific remit here in relation to climate resilience. Um, and so what I would be doing with this case is looking at, right, well, why are farmers not interested in polluticulture? What are the barriers? And there's a lot of literature on that. That they will almost certainly, whether they know the literature or not, they will certainly cite to you. Yeah, this is it's a major land use change. It's very difficult to reverse because you have to change the drainage, and that's a high risk kind of thing. There are not the markets or the supply chains for the products, and even if they are, the value of that is less than the value of the products that they can produce on dryland areas. So we've got suddenly three major barriers to this. And so what you need to do then is to be able to create a proposition to them that addresses those problems. And so my colleagues and I have been working on exactly this. We've got a meeting coming up with the Polluti Wise project. I'm not sure if that's what you're part of.
We are sister projects, advising your projects, yes.
So maybe email me afterwards and join that meeting. So some colleagues and I are working on a new technology that would enable farmers themselves to create low-grade biochar themselves with mobile reactors. That would not normally be eligible for carbon markets because it will oxidize and go up to the atmosphere. But if you bury this in peat under the water table, we've got evidence now that it is stable for long periods of time. And so what we're proposing is you shift to polluticulture and you build into that two forms of credit. So we're looking at the integration of polluticulture into the peatland code so that you can claim the emission reduction And in Ireland, there's a similar code being developed that I'm currently working on. So we could potentially build that into the Irish equivalent of that. But in addition to that, we're going to then stack on some biochar credits as well. So we're going to account the emission reduction based on raising your water table, and we're going to count all of the carbon that is removed from the atmosphere and stored in. The theory being that when you put those two carbon credits together, along with whatever products you can get from fluticulture, this now is significantly more financially attractive than the current land use. And that's the kind of thing that a farmers organization can get behind in terms of recommending this to their customers by saying, yeah, this will help the climate, but it will also help your farm business. Great. So instantly, a nice example, let's just pull back from this and generalize the lessons here. So great. I've got an organization and there's a problem. They're not interested in what I want to do because there's a problem with what I've got. And so we can't lie and say, yeah, fluticulture is really attractive to farmers. They all love it and they're going to make a fortune. There are real problems, which is why they're not interested. So now that we understand the reason for their disinterest, I can now specifically target what I think is the problem. And yeah, maybe that's a whole new research project before I go to that person, but at least I now know the problem and I don't waste my time reaching out, trying to influence someone that I know is not going to be interested. I think one useful thing that we've not mentioned is where you're working in a very polarized, conflicted arena. You've got organizations that are opposed to each other. You're coming into this conflict, and your research could give results that favor one side of the debate or the other, but you don't know. What this analysis enables you to do now is to say, great, we've got people with opposing interests. We now know the key power dynamic in terms of who has most influence against each other. And now we can engage with those people in a way which is going to be healthy. So I can decide ahead of time whether I put them in the same room as each other or I manage this with separate meetings. And I make it clear, look, we don't know which way this is going to go, but we want to create an impact plan with both of you so that if it goes your way, here's how we go. This is how we extract impact to benefit you guys. If it goes your way, then here's our impact plan. We don't know which way it's going to go. Now the results start coming out. Great. The people who it's going against, they have early sight of that. They've got time to adjust, to adapt, to protect their interests. They're not getting taken by surprise. And you clearly side with the evidence and their opponents. But they can see it was fair. They were given visibility to it. They could input, they could criticize. Yeah, but you didn't think about this, and what about that? And okay, we went and did some extra work, and it turns out we're still right, and you're still wrong. Great, they stay on side, and you can still continue working with them, even although apparently you've taken sides based on the evidence. So a really powerful tool. And now, yeah, your task is to go away, do this with your team, maybe bring some others in from the outside, prioritize your top organizations, reach out empathically with tailored contact, have those conversations. And now based on that, you create your impact plan. I'm going to give you a link to, oops, we're not on that yet. I'll give you a link to the impact plan. Let me just do that right now. And then I'll come on to my story. So I want to unpack this a bit more. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to give you a link to a Google Sheet. It's probably the simplest way of doing this. It's very simple. No, let's go back. Sorry, I should have had this already up on my screen. So I think you've got, yeah, view only access. So just go to File, make a copy, and this is all yours. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen to one I did earlier. So there's a bunch of sister projects on this call who are currently creating a policy influencing strategy. We just met yesterday on this. So here's what this might look like. So we've got the impact goal. We had a bunch of these. We prioritized the top 4 with a voting process. And here's the first one. I'll just look at this one. So integrate peatland restoration into the nature restoration regulation plans. Each country has to deliver these this summer. These are the relevant organisations, of course, differ from country to country. We've got a bunch of activities that we're doing here. So we've got a theory of change, a white paper we're writing, and a bunch of engagement with the national teams. I've added a couple of columns here, who's responsible and when, because we were having a planning meeting yesterday. And then we've got the future activities. So we're going to create a guidance note for landowner engagement and community benefit. So this is all about the implementation side of this. And where our sister projects are working in the same countries, we're going to collaborate on follow-up meetings with national teams. Next to this, we've got, who's going to do what, who's responsible, by when. We've got impact indicators that will tell us, is this working or not. We've had to think about what might be some of the risks, what could go wrong, how can we mitigate that. And in the original version of this, it's just organizational comments, who's going to do what in a quite a generic way. For this planning meeting, you can see I've just put one action per line so that we can have a very clear organization and date per activity. And you can see some of these other ones have got a few more activities. And then the ones we deprioritize at the bottom. And this one we've said, but we'll do this in the autumn, because actually the first 3 is already enough work. Great. So a sense now of what next. Do your 3I analysis, have those initial conversations. Based on those conversations, now come up with your impact plan. It doesn't have to just be you. It could be you and some sister projects. It could be you and some organizations. I've got another one where we've just done a very similar thing with a bunch of businesses. But now you've got a plan. It's strategic. It's timed. You've got the few key things that are going to make the biggest difference with a limited time you've got. So a couple of practical pointers and a story, and then a bit more discussion. And then we'll move through to the tools that we'll look at in the final session. So one of the first questions I get with the 3I analysis is, great, we've done this, but we still don't know how on earth to find anyone in that organization. And as I said, in an ideal world, you would go relational, so go through your networks. But always start with, actually, can we find these people online? Great, we now know who we're targeting. I would still then ask, so like my meeting yesterday, I asked the question, who are the key movers and shakers who are influencing this policy? And I got 2 names. Now I know those names, I can ask my network, does anyone know David or Grant in this case? And in this case, I have a good relationship with Grant, I'll connect you to Grant. So go to the website, have a look online. Can you find those named contacts? If so, great. Now go to LinkedIn, go to your networks. If you're a bit blind, still go to your network. Do you know anyone who works on this in this area? That's what these 2 people are calling me up to ask. We think you've got the right networks, Mark. Can you help? In this particular case, someone came to me saying, do you know anyone who works on climate change in this government department? And I scratched my head and realized, actually, no, I probably should, but I don't. Let me check my LinkedIn. So I put in climate change, people in this department, and instantly I realized, I've got 4 people in my network already. I then clicked to see, connections of those 4 people, and then connections of those connections. And by the 3rd degree connection, I had 713 named people with interests in climate change in that department. So I screenshot the first 2 pages, send that to the colleague, say, look them up and get in touch. Yeah, it's ideally you go relational, you get introduced, but if not, then LinkedIn would be my next place to go. It's a remarkably powerful search engine, and civil servants are very well represented, as well as the people in their networks. The final option, though, are paid directories consultants. These consultants describe themselves as public relations consultants, public affairs consultants. They are, in fact, the lobbyists. And of course, for a fee, they will connect you to all of their connections. And often they are surprisingly well connected, worryingly well connected. And this means you can also pay them. And now you've got a very big moral quandary here. Is it appropriate to work with a lobbyist? Well, if you are using that lobbyist to get your evidence to the right place, maybe that's okay. For me, this is an option of last resort. And I want to share a story of the one time I did use a lobbyist to get you to think about the moral red lines. Phew, Mark, would I do that? Yeah, I suddenly think very dimly of you now, Mark. Yeah, great, because you've just worked out where your moral red line is, and you're not going where I went. But also, what's really powerful about this illustration is the power of this 3I analysis to enable you to be adaptive when the political context changes. Because the reality is that it often takes a long time. There have been various studies, 3 studies I know of, that have all measured the time from publication to impact as over 10 years. In my case, we came up with the idea of the People in Code in 2005. It launched in 2015. And it wasn't until 2020, 21 that we were really getting any actual climate benefit from it. So you need to be in this for the long term. And there's a very good chance you're going to get a change of government in that period. So we had this idea and we went to a Labour-led government. So this is on the left of the spectrum. This was a government that had a department with climate change in the title. They were passionate about conservation. And so I did my 3I analysis and I identified that there was one organisation who had more influence than anyone else, and it was the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's IUCN UK peatland programme. I made it my job to get to know them. I went to all their meetings. I tried to make myself as useful as possible. And eventually, actually after this first part started, their research lead got a job, left. They ran out of money to pay the research lead. So I said, hey, I'll be your research lead for free if you want. And for the last 10 years, I've now been voluntary research lead for this IUCN programme. So I did that based on, if I want to have an influence, I need to be providing evidence to supporting this organisation because they have the ear of government, or at least they did at the time. And so my IUCN colleague and I went down to London. Our policy lead spoke to the minister. I was just in a coffee shop briefing him as he went in. Came back with, yeah, they love this. This is going to supercharge their agenda to fight the climate crisis and restore nature. Brilliant. And so we made lots of good progress. And it looked like we were on the cusp of getting the support we needed from government to integrate this into everything they were doing, when all of a sudden there was an election and we got a coalition government with a right-wing conservative politician who was a climate denier. And instantly we've got a problem. This guy doesn't believe climate change is a thing, let alone wanting to fix the climate crisis, not interested in nature conservation, but he's on the right. And so we go back into policy. And my colleagues pitch this in a different way. So we're a conservation charity trying to fight the climate crisis and restore nature in peat bogs. And we've got a mechanism that means that we're going to get private investment through carbon markets to help fix this problem. That means that you don't have to pay so much as the state. We know that you want to shrink the state and put less money into climate and nature. And here's how you do that without upsetting too many people. You let the carbon markets take up the slack. So yeah, we didn't agree with that, but hey, that's their manifesto pledge. They're shrinking the state. So yeah, that's democracy. But now this person's like, oh, that sounds like a fantastic idea. Free market rules. I'm up for this. And we've got a white paper now. This is going to become government policy. White paper goes well. And now we're saying, right, we need to move into actual concrete policy. And we get a new government with a new minister. And this new minister is not a climate denier, but just not interested in climate or nature. He's also a Brexiteer. He's pushing for Brexit. It hasn't happened yet. And his constituency has a lot of uplands. He loves walking in the uplands. And he loves sheep. He loves seeing sheep, and he's got good relationships with the hill farmers. He wants to help the hill farmers. And so we go to the next of these Conservative ministers, and we explain to him, so you haven't, it's been 2 years now, and you're doing nothing on this. And what we kind of suspect is, yeah, that was his predecessor. He's busy trying to make a name for himself. I want to do my own big new thing that I'll be remembered for. But we point out, yeah, this idea that your predecessor liked, it can help you solve a problem. All the research suggests that Brexit is going to be terrible for hill farmers. Those sheep are going to disappear. You're going to have a whole lot of angry hill farmers on your hands, but this mechanism can put more money in hill farmers' sheep than the EU can. Instantly, oh, that sounds like a good idea. And we've got the next minister on board. The whole time we're saying, yeah, clearly we're a conservation charity. We're about the climate and nature, whether or not you're interested in it. But based on your reasons, here's why you might want to keep moving this through the policy process. And so now we're getting way closer, and it's a reshuffle. And just as we're on the cusp of getting what we want, we've got a new minister. The new minister is a very rich member of the landed gentry. And so what happens next can probably only happen in Britain. He's a lord, owns a big country estate, and his policy is, I do not speak to conservationists. I hate all conservationists. There is no way to get through to him in any shape or form. Just complete block. And so at this point, my policy lead in IUCN comes to me and he says, Mark, I think the time has come to employ a friend of mine. And so this friend comes into our office, a public relations consultant. And he has a little black book, and he opens this little black book. And he says, yeah, for my half-price charity rate of £500 a day, I will connect you with my friends. In his black book, he's got lots of rich businessmen. He's got lots of lords and ladies, members of the royal family. Benedict Cumberbatch was in there with his phone number. Random rich and famous people that for a fee, yeah, my friend is your friend. And he came up with a plan that made my skin crawl. He was like, what we're going to do is we're going to organize a series of dinners in country houses. All of these rich conservative lords are all friends with each other. They all have upland estates with lots of peatlands on them that need to be fixed, that you want to fix. And here's the deal. You're going to present your idea at these dinner parties. And I'm going to invite all of their friends, including lots of rich and powerful people, to these dinners. And that's going to make them feel great. And your job is just to convince them that you've got a good idea. And so, thank goodness, I didn't have to go, but our head of policy went to these series of dinner parties. And he convinced these people, this is a great idea. Other companies are going to pay you to fix your estates, and it's going to make you money. And you can claim that you're doing good stuff for the climate and for nature. And yeah, what's not to like? Great. And it just so happened that on the third and final dinner party, the minister was there on a hunting visit. And the minister came to dinner. And his lords and friends pitched the idea to him, not the conservationists who just sat there watching. And after he'd heard his friends pitching the idea to him, he concluded, that's a jolly good idea. We should do that, shouldn't we, boys? And we got the Peatland Codes into policy, and yeah, as they say, the rest is history. Now, my question for you, is this influence or is this manipulation? Was this right or was this wrong? Would you do what we did? Is this about simply reframing the same evidence? I'm not changing the evidence. I'm not hiding who we are or the fact that we believe this is in the public interest. But I am quite strongly reframing this to keep the political momentum. And I'm doing this based on what I'm able to learn about the interests of those people rather than my interests. Good. So lots of interesting perspectives here. Luana, last week in Copenhagen at a conference, we had the same discussion. Should we include and collaborate with those holding economic resources regardless of their political views or not? So a very common was, do we work with the oil industry, for example? And so, yeah, I think you have to all each make your own view. So I've decided, I've been asked very explicitly, approached by oil companies, and I say, no, I will not work with oil companies. However, I do currently work with Diageo, the alcoholic drinks maker, and Nestle, two very controversial companies who are trying to lead on the sustainability agenda, and who I believe can do good things and have great influence, who I've decided to work with. But there are lots of people who wouldn't. Where do you draw that line? I think it's the personal thing. Any final thoughts on this? Yeah, thanks, Sarah. It makes sense. You need to speak to people where they are. Issue, I think, for a lot of people, groups, is they may not have the time or resources to do all this work telling their message. Yeah. And I didn't either, which is why I worked with this other organization. And that's why I think this 3I analysis, one of the most useful things is not necessarily to work out, yeah, that's the ultimate decision maker, but like I did, to work out, okay, here's the person who could influence that decision maker, and actually that's someone I can do business with because they're a conservation charity and they might actually work with me and I have access to them. Good. So in our last session, I want to move, if I may, to some more practical ideas. So lots of things that we can do in this space. We're going to try one thing out and have a look at this. And I want you to comment on what you like or don't like about each of these. And I think for speed and ease, let's just do this in plenary. So it doesn't matter if someone else has said the same thing, just put as many as you want in here. And yeah, things you like, things you don't like. I think there are good and poor practice elements of both, but I've chosen infographics because in theory, in a matter of seconds rather than minutes, you should be able to get the key policy messages. Can you? And what do you think? So a minute to have a look through them both, and then another minute to start writing some thoughts. So hopefully my key take-home message here has already hit you. I have opinions. And already all of these are entirely valid opinions. Instinctively, you know what works. And we kind of all figure, well, I need a professional designer. I need someone with expertise to do this. And yes, that helps and it will save you time. But there are lots of websites that can help you to do this in a very structured way. AI can also do this, and you can keep giving feedback and feedback to refine. It's easier than you might think nowadays to do this. And some of the things that are coming out of this are already making it clear, yeah, that's how not to do it. And here are the things that actually work. And it's about sharing this with a few colleagues who will give you the same kind of feedback. And actually, without any particular expertise, we can now create a policy infographic. And the value of a policy infographic is that once we've got one, this can be the front page of our policy brief. We can divide this up into different components and thread this through our text. This can be integrated into our presentations and seminars and webinars. And instantly, it helps us to clarify our message and distill it down to its essential components, which we're going to have to do anyway. So it's quite a nice exercise to think about. So instantly, we've got people talking about the color scheme in the good work, good health one. And the people who did this just didn't think about the fact that, yeah, red equals warning. There's something that is like, danger. It is not peaceful. And as a result, it kind of pushes you away, raises your temperature. And we don't want to be doing this. We want to draw people in. Yeah, evidence suggests actually universally across cultures, blue is people's favorite color. So if you're ever stuck for a choice of color, blue is always the safest choice. So great. Color is a problem instantly. But Sven's saying, yeah, I like the key message, which you can see at the top, and the detailed argumentation. Now, a policy infographic, yeah, it's about the graphics, but you do need a certain level of information. And so there is going to have to be some text, and perhaps more text than you might expect for an infographic. So I think the amount of text is acceptable on this one. But instantly you can see when you really drill into that text, it's still quite vague. There's not the level of specificity that we're going to need. So great to start refining what your key messages are, but you're going to have to accompany this either with a policy brief or a presentation or a meeting that actually explains how you do this idea. So we're going to use a bunch of different things. Erin is saying, yeah, actually, the color gets your attention, and you're right. That's definitely a good point, but always worth looking at the contrast issues. So AI can do this now. There are various standards, and I think some of this text does not have enough contrast. I think the white on orange, the white on light orange is probably breaking the rules there. So accessibility is important. Great. Let's see, onto the Simtegrate one. So yeah, they've got the same problem. We've got a lot of information. How do we get this across? Yeah, we're going to have to use some words. But yeah, there's a lot of information. Maybe they should have distilled it down. Did they need it all? Not sure. And it's quite small. Yeah. But like the graphic at the bottom. So some of the graphics are better than others. Some of them are just kind of illustrative. I think I'd always ask with an infographic, is this, can I replace the words with a graphic that actually speaks more powerfully than the words, ideally? That's your goal. And just having the words with an illustration, you're going to have too many words. It's not going to have the impact that you want it to have. Is this just a single study? And I think, yeah, this is the Simtegrate project. And so one would hope this is then contextualized within a presentation or policy brief that gives you access to the wider literature. I think usefully, the second one has some logos at the bottom, so it's got provenance. That top one was designed to go onto a website, a policy brief, and they put the logos there. But there is a question of who wrote this, where does this come from? There's no accountability, credibility, because there's no logos. So yeah, it's a heuristic, a shortcut people use for quality. But if you can add some logos, that can be helpful. Yeah, there's an issue of flow in that second one. First one is very obvious, top to bottom, but you can very easily get lost on the second one. If you're struggling, put some big arrows or numbers. Yeah, nice. So Irma, I've written about this actually quite extensively in my book. I think the temptation when we're using infographics, presentations, policy briefs is, let's put a map in. Let's put an actual graph with some data in. But they can actually be remarkably misleading. So yeah, I can map a whole load of things that come out, the carbon, the biodiversity, the water. I can't map the social, the cultural. And so it's just not on the map. And now we're making the decision excluding anyone's views of the social and the cultural because you can't map that stuff. You can't measure it. You can't put numbers to it. But actually, it's just as important. And in a policy context, maybe more important. And instantly, we just bias the whole conversation with that one graph or map. Really important to think about that. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, great. So, easier than you think and more complex than you think. But hopefully we're getting a sense of what works. But as I've suggested, I think in an ideal world, we use lots of different things. So we've talked about different framing of messages to different political, to match different political perspectives. If you feel comfortable about that, you may not. Different language, different audiences. I think a regular question I get is how long is too long for a policy brief? And there's no real answer to that because actually for an evidence analyst who is translating evidence for policy teams, pretty long, pretty technical with lots of data and graphs may actually help them do their job and they'll be very happy with that. They probably got a PhD. Yeah. If this is now to a politician, to a minister, we're looking at one page and very graphic heavy. And then kind of everything in between. So we're going to use different language, different formats. It could just be it's a meeting, one-to-one. That's all it is, and I need no graphic, no visual, nothing, no tool. It's just me and that one person. But we're very clear on what it is that we're trying to achieve. So we've got that key. Here is our policy ask. It's politically feasible and technically feasible, and we're going to tell you exactly how to do it. That's your idea. And it's surprising when if you look at that link, look at the example policy briefs, even the good quality ones, there's very few of them with sufficiently precise recommendations. A lot of them are just too vague. Yeah, nice idea, but how would you do that? Maybe I can give you an example here. Okay, so this was in note form. I haven't worked on those, just initial ideas, but great. Now we're into country specific. And so we've got transition plans with long-term public ecological stewardship. And this is the kind of level of detail. So here's the plan. Here's what it would look like. Here's the things you'd include in it. And here are the mechanisms where you would build it in. Here's the standard that you might want to put this. Here's an example you could base it on. You might want to then fund this by making it happen in existing funded schemes. You're going to have to think about all these different things to make it work. Great. You're planning to introduce a peatland carbon tax. Here's how it could go wrong. And so we think you need to be more transparent on your measurement, reporting and verification. And if people are not happy with the tax, they're going to complain and you're going to be hit with lawsuit after lawsuit. So you need an appeals framework. And so here is the proposal. And we've got detail here in terms of exactly how that works, the phasing of how you do it. And great. And then third and final idea, we want to increase investment. Well, great. We've got international markets. Not really working. We could do national markets. They wouldn't work either because you don't have additionality, which means you're only left with one option, which is internal decarbonisation strategies. Okay, how do you then mainstream this and get those people who are farming on peatlands to count that in their Scope 3 emissions and resolve that? Well, now here's a plan. And this is what you might be able to do. And so each of these then becomes a policy brief. And of course, that's the policy recommendation section, effectively. We've got the introduction, the problem context, the framing, the existing policy. Here's the evidence from our project. yeah, but that's what you need to actually have something credible that you can actually talk to a real policy person about, I'm going to suggest. Good. So let's finish with a few other ideas and then make a bit of more time for questions. So yeah, we're going to be clear on exactly what we want to achieve, what success looks like, and then we're going to get this to the right people. So yeah, social media might be the right way, but it could just be an email, a conversation. And we monitor this, we evaluate, is it working? We adapt as we go when it's not. But I think the key thing that we need to avoid that we do so often, especially in these EU projects, is great. We were commissioned to produce a bunch of policy briefs. We wrote them. We did a webinar. We don't even know who turned up to the webinar. Maybe nobody from policy. And we have no idea what happens next. And I'm going to suggest this is the first step. We've got a policy brief. We've got it to the right person. Now we follow up to find out, is this working? How can we help you? If it's not working, why not? How can we help you resolve those issues? And we actually take it all the way into policy. So that may require meetings. It may require roundtables. The thing about a roundtable is we're now bringing different people from different perspectives, different policy colleagues, different departments, agencies, maybe together with people from those wider networks. Let's discuss these policy ideas. Rather than saying, here is what you have to do, we're now putting in a policy brief with ideas for discussion. So actually, that's the next step with that one. We've got a Danish policy roundtable coming up later this month. We're going to send those ideas to our colleagues, and let's discuss these ideas. Could it work? Would it work? How would you make this work? Rubbish idea. Okay, what's a better idea? And only once we've done that roundtable are we now finalising this and getting their help to now pitch this to decision makers. But the nice thing is that, yeah, if you got it wrong, great, they'll correct you. If this is naive, yeah, they'll tell you how to make this more sensible, more feasible. And they get to learn from you. They get to interrogate the evidence base. It's a much more useful format. So I would always build this in somewhere to my influencing strategy. Here's some examples of infographics as policy briefs. And just look at this one on the right-hand side here. You wonder why I keep thinking about talking about peatlands. Well, the majority of boreal forests and tundra are peatlands, and a whole load of these wetlands are peatlands. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, below ground in peatlands, that's where the majority of the world's carbon seems to sit. Instantly, I can see why that matters. And if I was trying to communicate this in terms of peatlands, I might adapt this slightly to make that point more powerfully. But just instantly, oh, I suddenly realize why this matters. And so, yeah, you can see there's quite a lot of text on some of these. It's kind of a hybrid format, but can be very effective, especially for those kind of more senior decision makers. Here's some of the bits of software that you can use. Most of these have free options before you have to pay, where you can still do some quite nice stuff. It's a much more structured way of doing it than AI. And AI is not great at responding to feedback and quite often still makes mistakes, including embarrassing spelling errors. So be careful using AI. Nikki Ross was a postdoc with me actually for many years. She went on into a career in government, and when she was serving on the Committee for Climate Change in their secretariat, she tweeted this that yeah, what she was seeing is, yeah, it's amazing. These slide decks do the rounds, and yeah, we've all seen it. And so those slide decks again are very visual. So those infographic skills are going to come in handy. And to give you a sense of what this might look like, here's one I did earlier. And let's go to my publications page. If I can do this, let's see, on screen. The Scottish government said to me, look, you're helping advise us on natural capital policy, on all these markets and stuff. And it is just so big, so confusing, so fast moving. We just want a single PowerPoint slide that tells us everything that we need to know. And so this took a while, but eventually I came up with that slide. That slide then made its way to all 4 governments, and got me opportunities to present to committees, hearings, and the like. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I can. Oops, no, that was the slide. I can put this into this paper. And so here is my attempt, if you can see this in one slide, to say this is nature markets in the UK, and this is the issue space in which you're doing policy. Great. So yeah, slide decks can be very powerful, very useful, worth thinking about, and of course eminently adaptable to your next webinar or policy or seminar. Social media, I find this is more useful if you're direct messaging a politician, can be quite a useful way of getting in touch with people, and when you're more in campaigning mode, so I don't tend to use this much. I prefer to go targeted, way less time. It's just one person I need to talk to. Let's focus on getting the right message at the right time to the right person. And great, I've now got policy change compared to hours and weeks and months of social media campaigning that, yeah, very difficult to tell anything that it's actually done. So I put this here to say, yeah, it's legitimate, but very broad brush. I have written a book-length guide on this with the conversation media outlets. So if you want to use mass media or social media to achieve impact, then I'm going to suggest have a look at this, because all of those metrics of reach, doesn't matter how many million people you reached, if nobody got it, nobody does anything, who cares? What you need is significance, and this is about how you use these to actually get measurable, significant change. And then, yeah, this problem of how do you actually come up with decent policy recommendations? It's not just about feasibility technically, it's about the policy feasibility. So yeah, sorry, got the stakeholder word in here again. This is not my slide. But yeah, is it acceptable? Is it implementable? Is there a major cost problem? Yeah, could anything go wrong? Is this inclusive? Yeah, a nice little checklist to put your policy recommendations through to make sure that they're going to work. But yeah, some takeaways. Key thing is that we start by being clear on exactly who we want to benefit from this. And those are often not the politicians, not the civil servants, that's actual real people, habitats, species who don't have a voice. And let's think about now how we can represent their needs, their interests. Who are the people with power? Who are the others that still legitimately need to be involved? And let's now create an influencing strategy where we adapt to the needs of each of these different groups with actionable recommendations. And yeah, we've now got a plan. And we use what limited time and resource we have as effectively as possible. So do stay in touch. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this or anything. If you've got questions, message me, email, LinkedIn. I'll do my best to get back to you. Also remember that I run this training and many other courses around impact through Fast Track Impact, and go onto our website if you want more on that. And thanks again to the European Commission through the 4PEAT project for funding today's course.